They'll be moving into your house next month, Mom announced out of the blue. Great. I'll start packing this weekend, I replied, keeping my voice steady. The next morning, I called a realtor. For as long as I can remember, I've been the family's safety net, always there when needed, but never the priority. My entire life has been one long, exhausting reminder that my brother, Max, 34M, was the golden child while I was just there. The invisible daughter. The dependable backup plan, until the day I decided I was done being anyone's second choice. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't when I overheard my parents telling my grandfather that Max needed the inheritance more because he struggled with stability, while I'd always land on my feet. It wasn't when they skipped my college graduation because Max had a softball game. It wasn't even when they borrowed $7,000 from me, money I had worked hard to save, just to bail Max and his wife, Wendy, out of their third financial disaster in 2 years. No, the breaking point was the casual way they handed my home over like an afterthought, as if I wasn't even worth consulting. Growing up in Max's shadow was just part of my reality. While he got the latest PlayStation, I got his old, hand-me-down console with the sticky buttons. When Max made the basketball team, my parents rearranged their entire work schedules to be at every game. But when I made the honor roll for 4 straight years, my mother slapped the certificate on the fridge for exactly 3 days, before replacing it with Max's C+ in English, his first passing grade that semester. Max just needs more encouragement, Mom would explain whenever I asked why they never showed up to my debate competitions. You're so self-sufficient, Wendy. You've always been our little adult. Little adult. Code for, we don't have to worry about you. So we don't. Despite the constant undercurrent of neglect, I kept pushing forward. While Max dropped out of the fully paid-for state college after just 3 semesters, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through school. I earned scholarships. I graduated with honors. I landed a solid job at a financial consulting firm and slowly worked my way up. By 28, I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every single piece of furniture, I paid for it all myself. No loans from family, no parental cosigners. Just me. Meanwhile, Max and Wendy lurched from one disaster to the next. Max went through jobs like clockwork. He'd stick around for a few months, then disappear without explanation. Wendy's shopping habit only made things worse. And then there was Max's brilliant idea to sink $10,000, borrowed from our parents, into a cryptocurrency that was supposedly taking off. Through it all, my parents kept bailing him out. And whenever their own finances started feeling the strain, they'd come knocking on my door. Just a small loan, my father would say. Max is going through a rough patch. Those small loans, $700 here, $3,000 there, were never repaid. I kept track. Over 5 years, I had loaned my brother more than $20,000, money I knew I'd never see again. I wasn't the only one who noticed the pattern. At family gatherings, the comments would start off innocent enough. So generous of you to help your brother out again, my aunt would say, raising an eyebrow over the rim of her wine glass. Families should always stick together, right? My uncle was more blunt. Must be nice having a sister with deep pockets, he joked to Max, right in front of me. Some of us had to figure things out on our own. Still, I kept showing up, Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, the occasional weeknight meal when Mom would call and say, "It's been too long since we've seen you." I dragged myself over after a 10-hour workday, only to find Max and Wendy already there, feet propped up on the coffee table, drinking the beer I'd brought last time. And then came the dinner that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening in September. I had just closed a major account at work and was running on fumes when I pulled into my parents' driveway. The smell of Mom's lasagna filled the house, my favorite. That should have been my first clue that something was up. Max's car was already there, parked beside S. leased BMW, the one they definitely couldn't afford. Dinner started off as usual. Max dominated the conversation, rambling on about his latest get-rich-quick scheme, house flipping. Apparently, watching a few episodes of HGTV had made him an expert. Meanwhile, Wendy showed off a brand new designer purse, which probably cost more than my mortgage payment. As always, my parents nodded along, hanging on their every word. I was halfway through my second glass of wine when my mom cleared her throat. "So we've been talking," she said, glancing at my dad for support. "About Max and Wendy's situation." My stomach twisted. Here it comes, I thought, another loan request. My mind automatically ran the numbers, mentally scanning my bank balance to see how much I could spare without dipping into my emergency fund. "They've been struggling ever since their landlord raised the rent," Mom went on, her voice laced with concern. "And with the baby coming." Wait. Baby? That was news to me. Wendy hadn't said a word about being pregnant. "So we came up with a solution," Mom continued, her tone breezy, like she was announcing dinner plans. "They'll be moving into your house next month. You can take the smaller bedroom, or if you'd rather, you can move back in with us for a while." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. My stomach dropped, like that split-second freefall on a roller coaster. I glanced around the table, waiting for someone to laugh, to say they were kidding. No one was joking. "My house," I finally managed to say. "It makes perfect sense," Dad chimed in. "You've got 3 bedrooms, you don't need all that space just for yourself." Wendy, already scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. "Oh, and I found the perfect nursery set. It'll fit beautifully in the front bedroom, you know, the one with the bay window." My bay window. In my house. The house I paid for. Mom reached across the table, patting my hand like she was doing me a favor. "And this way, you won't have to worry about taking care of such a big place all on your own. It's really the most practical solution." They weren't asking. They were telling me. They had made this decision without me, as if my home, something I had worked 60-hour weeks to afford, was community property. As if I was community property. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. The last frayed thread of obligation finally broke. I forced a smile. "Sure, that makes sense. When were you thinking they'd move in?" Relief rippled across the table. Mom's shoulders loosened. Dad gave an approving nod. Max and Wendy exchanged smug little glances. "We were thinking the first of the month," Max said. "That gives you about 3 weeks to get things sorted." 3 weeks. They were giving me 3 weeks to hand over my life. "Perfect," I said, taking another sip of wine to mask the slight tremor in my hands. "I'll start packing this weekend." The rest of dinner blurred into meaningless noise. I nodded when expected, forced smiles at the right moments, and felt a piece of me die every time Wendy casually mentioned another change she planned to make to my house. By the time I slid into my car to drive home, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the wheel. Hot tears streaked down my face. A few blocks from my parents' house, I had to pull over, my vision too blurred by rage and heartbreak to see the road. I sat there, engine humming, and screamed until my throat burned raw. Then I exhaled, wiped my face, and made a decision. If they wanted my house so badly, they could have it. Just not the way they expected. 2 months earlier, my company had offered me a promotion, senior consultant, with a 35% salary bump. The catch? I'd have to relocate to our Chicago office. I'd been hesitating, unwilling to leave behind the family I still felt tied to, despite everything. That tie had just been severed. At exactly 11:30 p.m. that night, I called my boss. "I'll take the Chicago position," I said, skipping the pleasantries. There was a pause, then a surprise but pleased. "That's fantastic, Michelle. When can you start? How soon do you need me?" "Well, the sooner the better. The Hawkins account is struggling without leadership." 3 weeks, I said firmly. "I'll be there in 3 weeks." That wasn't a random timeline. The next morning, I called a realtor, but not one my parents knew. I found a woman from the next town over and listed my house at a competitive price, just below market value to guarantee a quick sale. The listing photos went up on Friday. By Monday, I had 3 offers. By Wednesday, I'd accepted an all-cash deal with a 21-day closing. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. For the next 2 weeks, I played my role flawlessly. To my family, I was the ever-compliant daughter, dutifully preparing my house for Max and Wendy's arrival. I made a show of decluttering, telling them I was getting rid of furniture to make space for the nursery, which explained the moving boxes and packed closets. I asked about paint colors and curtain preferences. I even invited Wendy over to plan the space. She strutted through my home like she already owned it, pointing out where her sectional would go, which walls she'd repaint, how she planned to rip out the vegetable garden I'd tended for 2 years because it's just not my aesthetic. Every smug remark, every entitled assumption made it easier to follow through with my plan. Meanwhile, I was methodically erasing myself. I transferred to a new bank, leaving just enough in my old accounts to avoid suspicion. I secured an apartment in Chicago, signed the lease electronically, and redirected my mail to a P.O. box. I sold what furniture I couldn't take and packed the rest into a storage unit under a different name. 3 days before closing, I took a business trip. That was really a flight to Chicago to finalize my move. I returned only long enough to sign the closing papers, collect my cashier's check, and load my last belongings into. On the day Max and Wendy thought they'd be moving into my house, I was already 330 miles away, settling into my new apartment with a view of lake. I stood alone in my new living room, letting the unfamiliar sounds of the city drift in through the windows. My phone buzzed nonstop on the kitchen counter, calls, texts, voicemails, all from my family. I could picture exactly what was happening back home. Max and Wendy pulling up with their moving truck, maybe my parents there to help, all of them standing dumbfounded on the front lawn as total strangers carried furniture into what they had assumed was Max's new house. I imagined their faces when the new owners explained it to them. Yes, they just bought the place from Michelle. No, she hadn't mentioned anything about her family moving in. Yes, the sale was final. No, they had no idea where she'd gone. I let myself savor that mental image for a solid minute before flipping my phone to silent and unpacking my first box. The calls and texts didn't stop. My mother's voicemails quickly escalated, confusion turning to anger, then to tearful desperation. How could you do this to us? To your brother? Where are they supposed to go now? You need to call us back right this second and explain yourself, young lady. Please, Michelle, we can fix this. Just tell us where you are. After 2 days of relentless messages, I finally sent a single text. The same place I was supposed to go, I guess. Figure it out. Then I blocked them. It wasn't just my parents and Max. I cut off the whole toxic mess. My cousin Victoria chimed in next. You've always been jealous of Max. This is a new low, even for you. Blocked. An uncle decided to weigh in. Your grandfather would be ashamed of your selfishness. Blocked. An aunt sent. Your mother hasn't stopped crying since you pulled this stunt. Is that what you wanted? Blocked. Each deletion felt like shedding another pound of dead weight I'd been dragging for years. 2 weeks into my self-imposed exile, an unexpected text popped up, from Ada, a former coworker. She wasn't close with my family, but she was close enough to have caught wind of the drama. So, your brother and his pregnant wife are living in your parents' basement. Your mom's telling everyone you had some kind of mental breakdown. Just thought you should know. I didn't respond, but I didn't block her either. Ada became my occasional window into the world I'd left behind. A month later, she texted again. Remember that crypto thing Max was into? Apparently, he put in a lot more than anyone knew, like, a lot more. That didn't shock me. Max had a gift for doubling down on terrible decisions. What did surprise me was learning that he'd somehow convinced my parents to invest their entire retirement savings into the same scheme, promising them guaranteed 40% returns within 7 months. When the cryptocurrency took its first major nosedive, Max panicked. Instead of cutting his losses, he made it worse, borrowing money from 3 different payday lenders to buy the dip, Then he maxed out 2 credit cards under my parents' names, cards they didn't even know existed until the collection agencies started calling. By month 3, the whole thing had gone up in flames. The cryptocurrency was exposed as a massive scam. Max was drowning in debt. And to top it off, he was now facing possible legal trouble for some shady side hustle tied to the scheme. My parents had taken out a second mortgage just to cover Max's most urgent debts. Wendy, pregnant and overwhelmed, was threatening to leave him. I felt a flicker of sympathy, not for Max, not for my parents, but for the child being dragged into their mess. A few days later, I sent an anonymous gift card for a baby supply store to Wendy's mother's address. That was the only concession I allowed myself to the guilt that occasionally crept in. Meanwhile, my new life was everything I had hoped for. My job pushed me in ways my old position never had. I made friends who knew nothing about my family's dysfunction, friends who saw me for who I was, competent, confident, and in control of my own life. 6 months after I left, I received a letter, forwarded from my old P.O. box. The return address was from my grandfather's nursing home. Inside was a short note, written in shaky, familiar handwriting. Michelle, I heard what happened. Your mother tells a different version than what I suspect is the truth. I always knew you were the strong one, the smart one. I'm sorry I let your parents convince me that Max needed more help in the will. They said you'd always land on your feet, while he needed a safety net. I see now who really needed protection. I've changed my will. It's not much, but it's something. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Love, Grandpa. For the first time since leaving, I cried. Not out of sadness. Not out of guilt. But because someone in my family had finally seen me. 6 months after I disappeared, Max and Wendy had their baby, a girl. They named her Michelle. According to Jen, it was Wendy's way of extending an olive branch. I sent another anonymous gift, a savings bond that would mature when little Michelle turned 18. Attached was a single note. For college. No strings attached. I had no intention of stepping back into their lives. But that baby? She deserved a chance, even if her parents were a disaster. Then, almost exactly a year after I left, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Michelle. It was my mother's voice, tentative, small. I said nothing. Just waited. Please don't hang up. She rushed out. We need help. A pause. Then a breathless confession. Your father had a minor heart attack last month. The medical bills, Max and Wendy, the baby, they're still living with us. We can't. She hesitated, her voice breaking. We're about to lose the house. The old me would have already been crunching numbers, figuring out how much I could spare. The old me would have felt responsible, like it was my job to fix everything. But that wasn't me anymore. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, my voice steady. I hope Dad recovers quickly. Silence. Then, my mother's voice cracked. That's it. Your family is falling apart, and that's all you have to say? I exhaled slowly. What do you want me to say, Mom? That I'll fix everything again? That I'll throw my life away to clean up a mess I didn't make? The pause between us stretched long and heavy. We're your family, she whispered finally. No, I replied. You're Max's family. I was just a backup plan. The safety net. The one you knew would always land on her feet while you poured everything into him. I heard her sharp intake of breath. Who told you that? Does it matter? I asked. It's always been the truth, hasn't it? She didn't deny it. I have to go, Mom. Take care of yourself. Then, I hung up and blocked the number. That evening, my company offered me another promotion, this time to our international office in London. I accepted without hesitation. The distance felt right. The night before my flight, I sat on my Chicago balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights shimmer against the lake. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who spent years chasing approval, setting herself on fire just to keep others warm. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that real family doesn't drain you dry and call it love. That boundaries aren't selfish, they're survival. That sometimes, walking away isn't quitting. It's choosing to move forward. I had lost a family. But I had found myself. And in the end, that was the better trade. I raised my glass to the skyline, to new beginnings, to the power of no, to the freedom that comes from choosing yourself. My phone buzzed with a text from my new London flatmate, confirming my arrival time. Tomorrow would bring a new city, new challenges, and new opportunities to build the life I deserved. My family had expected me to be their eternal safety net. Instead, I became my own. They had counted on me to set myself on fire to keep them warm. Instead, I walked away and built my own fire. And I was never going back to the cold again.